Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I'm going to be bringing you my 2020 election prediction for the presidency. Now, as you can see, I'm currently running with Generic Democrat versus Donald Trump. The reason being for Generic Democrat is currently the primary race seems to be at the very least split between Warren, Sanders, and Biden, each who would bring their own different ways to campaign and promote their policies, but also because it appears Mayor Buttigieg is having a surge as well. And he would be another interesting cog. Each would work differently, campaign in different states, propose different policies, motivate different portions of the base, and have their own individual controversies. As such, I personally believe the best way to move forward is, say, Generic Democrat. As such, the Democrats will not be getting any inherent bonuses from certain states they may succeed in more effectively, such as Elizabeth Warren and Senator Sanders in the Midwest, Vice President Biden in the South, Mayor Buttigieg, maybe in Indiana. We'll have to see. But for this point, we will also assume that Donald Trump will be the nominee. He hasn't been removed from office yet, and given the fact Republicans have now closed down 5 primaries, we can assume Trump will be their nominee unless he is removed from office. So let's begin with the Northeast, over here in Maine. Now Maine, much like Nebraska, splits up its votes based on the popular vote. So the state overall gives its votes to someone, that's 2, representing the senators. Then in each of its congressional districts, they each give 1 district over. Now, Maine is going to give... I'm just going to spoil something here. If Donald Trump failed to win a state in 2016, he's not going to be getting it this time. And given the implementation of ranked choice voting, and the overall turn of Maine's 2nd congressional district towards a more blue side, and the fact you don't need to worry about an independent running in this race, I'm going to be assuming that Maine's 2nd district is ever so lightly tilting blue. Then we have New Hampshire. New Hampshire is solid blue. Vermont is solid blue. The rest of New England is all solid blue. And yes, I do mean New Hampshire. I know there is a temptation to put New Hampshire down as a likely state, and if this was anyone else but Trump, I would say it's likely. However, given his inability to win it in 2016, despite the Republican governor returning to power and winning his re-election, I don't see how Trump can win this state in 2020, especially given the fact his approvals are going down. That would be unprecedented for him to start winning states he lost in 2016. So going down the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, not Massachusetts, D.C., and Virginia are all going to go solid blue. And yes, Virginia, if you've seen my Senate video, you know my logic behind this. They got a blue trifecta this last election. At the statewide level, except for 1 Republican, they have voted blue regularly, and they're only going bluer. I am aware it's due to Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Newport News. But they're still turning the state blue. Okay. We'll get back to Pennsylvania in a moment. We'll leave the real toss-up states for the end. Now going over here to the Appalachian Mountains, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, all 3 are solid red. I know Kentucky recently elected a Democratic governor. That does not mean anything in the grand scheme of things for Kentucky until we start seeing polls where Democrats are more competitive. Because the governor barely won against the really bad incumbent. Every other statewide race went easily to the Republicans. So I don't see them changing up their statewide vote. In the Rust Belt, Indiana, it's solid red. But, we're assuming Pence will remain the vice president. They will vote for Pence at the very least. despite the fact they hate him, and because they will choose him over and Trump over any Democrat that could come along. Ohio will be likely Republican, because there is always that little risk that I accidentally put, nope, sorry, I'm getting used to this color scheme. Different monitor, so everything's a slightly lighter shade than it was previously for me. Ohio is likely, because, you know what? There is a way candidates could turn Ohio blue. It would require a lot of effort, but they could do it. And I could see an easy path for an upset in Ohio. Well, not an easy path, but a path, nonetheless. As such, I'm putting Ohio as likely. And here's why Ohio is so important, and why Republicans should really be trying to get Ohio to be a solid red state at the statewide level, because that's where their weaknesses have been. If there is no path where the Republicans can win the presidency and lose Ohio, but there are paths now for the Democrats to win the presidency and lose Ohio, and that is not something the Republicans want. Continuing around the Great Lakes, I'm going to give the Democrats 2 more safe seats in Illinois and Montana. Not Montana. Minnesota. Too many states have MN. But Montana and Illinois. Illinois, obvious one. The Chicago area pulls that state hard blue. Minnesota, on the other hand, I can see the arguments for Minnesota being a likely blue state. However, given the fact it has a longer history of statewide races going blue than Virginia, and it went blue in 2016, I'm saying it's safe. We'll get back to Wisconsin and Michigan in a moment. Going down along the Mississippi River, we have Iowa. I'll leave Iowa as a toss-up for right now, but we'll get back to it in a moment. However, Missouri is a solid red state. It has 2 potent cities that, if their populations swell and their suburban areas continue to go blue, could make this state competitive. I'm referring to St. Louis and Kansas City. However, right now, that's not happening. And as long as that's not happening, that state is solid red. Same logic for Arkansas and same logic for Louisiana. Both have solid, strong red districts. Strong blue districts. However, that's not enough to offset the state as a whole. Because Arkansas has Little Rock, that's not enough to flip it. Louisiana has New Orleans, that's not going to flip it yet. I'm going to do another video on this, but I'm willing to bet by 2024, the South is going to be starting to look a lot more competitive. Next up, we have Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina. North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida are already toss-ups for the purposes of revisiting. South Carolina is solid red. I know, it is flanked by Georgia and North Carolina, so everyone wants to consider it a little bit more of a fighting state, especially since it has Lindsey Graham as its senator, but that ain't gonna happen, folks. At least not this election. I know I think I was a little bit more generous to his Senate opponent, but at the state level, it's not gonna flip. Same for Alabama. Democrats got Doug Jones. I'm almost 100% they're going to lose Doug Jones, and it's going to be a solid red wave. Mississippi is actually a state I'm a little bit less sure of putting in the solid column. I will, because right now I don't see a Democrat winning Mississippi. Maybe Joe Biden. I'm going to be totally honest here. I could see a pathway for Joe Biden and maybe Senator Sanders to win the state. But for right now, I don't see a pathway for a generic Democrat. However, Mississippi has overall started to trend Democratic faster. It's starting to look like what Georgia and North Carolina looked like back in 2012, actually, I'd probably say. Blue areas, but not enough to really move the state. However, it's getting to a point where in the next presidential election, I will probably be putting Mississippi at the very least as a likely Republican state, if not leans, depending on how elections go in those layover years. Texas is a toss-up for my purposes here. We will get back to it, but Texas I cannot, in any good faith, put as solid or likely. Oklahoma, where the land is red. It is going to be red. I'm sorry, Okies, but if you want it to go blue, if you want it to go red, great. If you want it to go blue, you're not going to be able to flip it. Your state is one of the least competitive states, in my opinion, because not even your biggest urban area your biggest urban area is purple at best. So your state is solid red. Kansas. Good old Kansas. Given the events that have gone down in Kansas, for right now, I'm putting Kansas as a solid red state. However, if Chris Kobach is the Senate nominee, him and Trump together in the same election, I could see Kansas becoming more competitive. However, since that hasn't happened yet, I'm leaving it as solid, because it relies on something happening in the Senate race, not the presidential race. Nebraska has the same deal as Maine. Overall, it's going to go red, as well as its 1st and 3rd districts. Its 2nd district, which is basically the Omaha-Lincoln metro area, I'm willing to say is likely. For the same reason Ohio is likely. It's probably not going to flip, but there's definitely a path to it happening. So I'm willing to say likely. South Dakota and North Dakota, solid, continuing across the Great Plains, witnessing a lot of solid red. I know there are those who want to say, well, Montana sometimes votes blue at the state level, isn't it more competitive? Hasn't been willing to do that flip at the federal level yet. And if I'm willing to talk about switching it up if they regularly start voting blue at the state level for everything, including senator and governor, but they barely look like they're holding on to the governor and probably will lose it, and nearly lost the Senate last one and are most likely going to keep it red this election. I don't know why I keep saying one. Continuing down into the Southwest, we have Utah, which for right now I'm going to put as solid red. Actually, in a moment of clarity, I'm going to say it's likely red. For one simple reason, Salt Lake City. I remember looking into, and Native American reservations. I was looking into this earlier, and what I've realized is Salt Lake City has a large enough population that if it showed out in force along with Native American reservations and Republicans just show up at normal turnout rates, it could go blue. And this isn't exactly a fantasy on my part, because if you recall, before Mitt Romney jumped into the Senate race in 2018, Orrin Hatch looked like he was going to lose to a Democrat. As such, I'm putting Utah as likely Republican for now. Okay, now into the Southwest. Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, and the West Coast are all blue. Arizona is a toss-up, and we'll get back to it in a moment. Why is Nevada solid blue? Frankly, it didn't vote for the incumbent president in 2016, and has voted blue at the statewide across the board. Democrats could still lose it, but I'm going to need to see polling showing Trump winning in Nevada in order for me to take this out of the safe category. Because when a president's popularity is tanking as his is across the country, I'm being rather generous to Republicans by currently leaving states like Kansas and Kentucky totally red at this point. But Nevada, if it flips, it would be a tad unprecedented for a state to totally flip to the incumbent party from being in the opposition party. And given its proximity to California and the amount of immigration coming from there, that's mostly been blue, because most of California's red immigration has gone to Indiana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Texas for the most part. So down here into the Pacific, we have Hawaii, which is solid blue. I think they only have 2 Republicans in their state government at this point. And Alaska, which I'm going to put as solid red. While I could see a Senate race becoming more contentious, because that is very much a battle happening at the state level, at the federal level, Alaskans are going to vote to have as little power in the federal government as possible. Little power for the federal government to enforce things over Alaska as possible. As such, it's a solid case they'll vote for Trump. I know there are some who can make the argument, well, the wildlife refuge and the drilling. A lot of the people in Alaska are going to benefit from that drilling. Just a fact. They're going to see an increase in, I can't remember what it's called, but fund payments. Permanent fund payments, that's what it is. Okay, now on to the toss-up races. Let's begin over here with Arizona. Arizona is a fun state to look at because it is what everyone imagines Colorado to be. Arizona has a lot of highly concentrated blue areas. Think Phoenix, Mesa, and that area. In fact, the southern part of the state, below the Gadsden area of the state, is so blue, back in 2011 it considered leaving to form its own state, called Baja, Arizona. I'm going to do a video on that later, because, frankly, I think Democrats could actually benefit from the addition of a Baja, Arizona. It would have been a solid blue state, while Arizona itself would be purple. And as such, and given the fact... Now, I will say, someone like a Warren or a Sanders is more likely to lose this state, while a Biden or a Buttigieg is most likely to hang on to it. But I'm going to say Arizona is tilt Democrat for right now. Now, let's go up to the Great Lakes and start with Iowa. Iowa. The primary state. It's where the caucuses happen. It's where the real presidential election fight club starts. And it is not purple, guys. Everyone wants it to be purple, and that's the only reason why it's purple right now. I see it as going likely Trump. A state cannot be purple and then for the past, at this point, decade, vote red consistently at the state level. You cannot call a state a toss-up at that point. I'm calling it a toss-up because if I don't call Iowa a toss-up, people on both sides can act like I'm crazy. But frankly, it's likely red. It is, if there were 5 categories instead of 4 categories, it would go in the exact middle red, while somewhere like Ohio and Utah would go at the 4 out of 5 red. But it's 4 categories, so there. Okay, Wisconsin and Michigan. Michigan is easy. Trump taking Michigan was, in some ways, a little bit of a fluke. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, well, they accidentally signed the wrong ballots. I think there were enough disenfranchised people who felt Hillary Clinton... Enough disenfranchised people, and enough people who felt, well, Hillary Clinton was going to win, so I don't need to turn out, or I can cast a protest ballot, that Democrats lost Michigan. Their regular success at the statewide level for Senate all but guarantees they'll be able to retake it in 2020, especially with the history of the incumbent president losing states in their re-election bid. Wisconsin, on the other hand, is a lot more of a contentious state. I think everyone assumed Wisconsin was solid blue, but given the close races they've had for governor and Senate, I have to put Wisconsin over as leans blue. Now, as you can see from our little bar, this is enough to push the Democrats over the top. However, it does currently require Arizona and actually just Arizona to push the bar just enough over the top for them to win. And Maine 2nd District also come in. So, do the Democrats have a more solid path to victory, is the other question. Because if someone comes in who either loses Arizona or loses Wisconsin, they still lose. And with that, let's move down to Texas. Texas was the state, to quote Jon Stewart at one point, Texas is the lesbian in the bar, and the Democratic Party is the guy trying to pick her up, betting he can turn her. But she's not going to turn. Then Beto O'Rourke ran and got so much closer than anyone thought he would. In fact, I'm just going to be frank. Across the South, so many races were a lot closer than people expected. Mississippi and Alabama are the two top contenders for this, but also now with Kentucky's governorship flipping. The idea of the solid red South is beginning to vanish. And I think Texas took the biggest hit because academically, for a long time, it was a purple state, but in 2018, it in practice became a purple state. That being said, a red state, I think it will remain, at the very least for this next election. However, not in any way as solid as the Republicans would like it to be. Because Texas is turning blue. By 2024, we'll have to see what the race is looking like, but if you have a solid Democratic incumbent who's been able to pass a lot of good legislation, like improving healthcare and all that jazz, you could see a blue Texas. Just not today. And not in 2020. So, will the Democrats be able to find solitude in the South? Actually, let's start off with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, a state that is probably the most purple state I can think of, keeps voting blue at the state level, but periodically flips the script and is willing to go red. And it's at the state legislature, it is still red. As such, given Pennsylvania's history and all that's come before, it leans Democrat. Like I said, if I had 5 rankings, this would go 3 out of 5, while Wisconsin would go 2 out of 5, but Pennsylvania is a state that I can say is confusing. Has 2 really big urban areas, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. But those urban areas are so finicky. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. And in the middle of the state, you have a solid red strip that will always show up to vote. So it's always a question, do the two major cities show up to vote more than the guys in the strip? I think for 2020, going by historical trends and frankly how Pennsylvania's been going as of late, I think a good solid 70% of the time they go Democratic with ease. 30% of the time, Republicans are able to take it. So, there's a little bit of solace for any Democrats out there. Probably going to get Pennsylvania to make up for any more tense states. And speaking of tense states, let's go down to the South, starting with North Carolina. North Carolina is what everyone thinks Virginia is. It's a purple state with a very, let's just say, gerrymandering red legislature, who's been able to hold on to power. However, given the requirement of their Supreme Court to redraw maps, the fact there's going to be a Senate race and the governor's race on the ticket, I think the state could flip at the presidential level. To the point I'm putting it now, we'll have to wait as tilt. because could flip is important. If we start seeing good polling in the Senate and governor race, then I'm willing to turn around and say, okay, probably leans, maybe likely, depending on what happens. And also, just because I remembered it, the fact that North Carolina voted, the popular vote went to the Democrats, but Republicans still won the state house. That type of rage can really be motivated at the state level, as Democrats have discovered. Speaking of rage about things at the state level, Georgia. Georgia now has 2 Senate races. Is still dealing with the backlash of the all-too-contentious governor's race, where, for all intents and purposes, it does appear to have been stolen by the Republicans. While I think that there is a good 75% chance Republicans earned it outright, there are chances that there is a good chance that they might have been able to suppress enough votes that if everyone could vote, things would go another way. So, Georgia. What do I think is going to happen there? There will be enough turnout, enough motivation that Democrats could win the state. However, there are also a lot of factors working against them. As such, just based on motivation to turn out to vote and how close elections there have been in the past, I'm putting it as tilt Republican. If we start getting polls from the Senate races and on the statewide level that show Republicans with at least a good 4-point advantage in most of these elections, I'm going to say Georgia will probably drop down go up to leans Republican, maybe likely, depending on how good they are. Lastly, Florida. At this point, you can see my prediction is heavily indicating Democrats will win in 2020. But taking Florida would be a major victory for them. But I don't think they'll do it. I think it is currently tilt Republican. So, I'll cover the reasons why I don't think they can get it, and then the reasons why I think they could. Right now, the state is very entrenched in Republican politics. They managed to take out their Democratic senator and replace him with a Republican during the Blue Wave. The popular gubernatorial candidate lost by a solid margin. And also the fact that that state, let's be honest, Florida has a long-standing history of voting red without the considerations of gerrymandering. However, disenfranchisement is definitely an issue. Speaking of disenfranchisement, on the positive side for Democrats, regaining Florida is possible for them. Florida has a long-standing history of being a purple state. Barack Obama was able to win it. Twice, if I recall correctly. They have recently been able to roll back a lot of the disenfranchisement, especially for felons. However, there is no guarantee those felons will vote. There are now 1 million more voters who might vote Democrat. And lastly, and this is the main reason why I'm putting it on tilt now as opposed to leans, recently a judge passed a law saying, recently a judge required them to, I believe, either alphabetize or randomize how candidates are listed on the ballot. The current way the law was set up always put Republicans first for general elections. And mathematicians believe that could have aided Republicans by giving them up to 5% in some elections. And most elections in Florida are won by margins of less than 5% at the state level. Bush, the last Senate election, last gubernatorial election, basically every Senate election they've had have all been within 5%. As such, this could really hurt the Republicans, assuming that they were getting 5% from from people just choosing the first name on the ballot. But I can't at all assume that's what happened. But there's my presidential prediction for a generic Democrat versus Trump. Democrats gain 305 votes in the Electoral College. Trump gets 233. A solid victory for the Democrats, but frankly, not everything anyone could hope for, but not everything that a lot of Democrats wish they could have. But with that being said, this has been One Man Think Tank. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and click the notification bell, and leave a comment down below, as I mentioned before. Other than that, have a wonderful day.